All right, so picture this, okay? It's Oklahoma in
Yeah.
the early 1900s, like right around when oil's starting to boom.
Wow.
But here's the thing. We're talking about the Osage Nation. They're sitting on a massive amount of this liquid gold.
Oh, wow.
I mean, can you imagine? After being forcibly moved from their land, stripped of their traditions,
Right.
suddenly they're among the wealthiest people in the nation.
Talk about a dramatic turn of events. It's like destiny had other
It
plans.
really is. And this is where things get messy. The government steps in with this system. They called it allotment.
Allotment.
The
Okay.
idea was to divide up the Osage's communally held land into individual plots, right?
Interesting. Like each person gets their own piece.
Exactly. On
Yeah.
surface, it was supposed to help assimilate Native Americans into white society, give them land ownership, make them real Americans in the eyes of the government.
Assimilation. Right. A common theme, unfortunately.
Sadly, yeah. But instead of empowering them, it made them vulnerable. Yet
Yeah.
people who've lived communally for generations,
Right.
suddenly they're thrust into this world of individual land ownership.
Which they weren't prepared for.
Not at all. And the sharks were circling. You had all these opportunists looking to exploit the Osage, take advantage of their lack of experience.
It's a classic tale, unfortunately. Greed, power, preying on the vulnerable, a recipe for disaster.
And disaster is exactly what happened. A darkness fell over the Osage Nation. It started subtly at first, almost unnoticeable. Whispers of suspicious deaths, accidents that seemed a little too convenient.
Oh, I see where this is going, like a shadow creeping in.
Exactly. And as more Osage met untimely ends, the more those whispers turned into screams. People started to realize this was no coincidence. Something sinister was afoot.
And this is where David Grand's book, Killers of the Flower Moon, really pulls you in, right?
Absolutely. Grant does a phenomenal job of bringing this story to life. And one of the central figures in this whole saga is Molly Burkhart.
Molly Burkhart.
Okay. Now, Molly's story, it's fascinating in itself. See, unlike some of her peers who kind of embraced the changing times, Molly held on to her Osage identity fiercely.
She didn't assimilate.
No, not one bit. She wore traditional clothing, kept her hair long and flowing in the old ways. Imagine, in the roaring 20s, with flapper dresses and bob haircuts everywhere,
Right?
Molly stood out. She was a living embodiment of her ancestors, a testament to the strength and resilience of her people.
That's powerful. So she's living in this changing world, holding on to her traditions, and then these murders start happening.
And they hit close to home for Molly. You see, she was married to a white man, a former Texas cowboy named Ernest Burkhart.
Okay. Ernest Burkhart.
And Ernest, like so many others, was drawn to the Osage Hills, hoping to strike it rich. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Ernest had an uncle, a prominent rancher, William Hale.
William Hale. All right. Now, something tells me this uncle's not going to be winning any humanitarian awards.
You got that right. See, Hale was a piece of work. He was nicknamed the King of the Osage Hills, powerful, charismatic, and ruthless. He cultivated this image of a benefactor, someone who cared about the Osage.
Oh, I bet. A wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. He donated to their schools, gave money to those in need, but all of that was a facade.
A calculated move to gain their trust, I imagine.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Behind that carefully constructed mask of generosity was a man driven by greed and a thirst for power. And when Molly's sister, Anna Brown, is found dead under very suspicious circumstances, shot in the head, those whispers about Hale, they start to sound a lot more like accusations.
Oh, man. So it's getting real. The stakes are higher. And I'm guessing the Osage, they've already been through so much they don't know where to turn.
You're catching on quickly. Imagine the fear that must have gripped the community. Their newfound wealth, instead of bringing prosperity, had made them targets. And they were right to be afraid, because this was just the tip of the iceberg. So you've got this wave of terror washing over the Osage Nation. And to make matters worse, the local law enforcement. Well, they weren't exactly known for their effectiveness, or their honesty for that matter.
Oh, so corruption was rampant.
You could say that again. It was like the Wild West all over again, only this time, the stakes were even higher.
So who are they supposed to turn to? Who could they trust?
That's the million-dollar question. And this is where things take an interesting turn. The Osage, they knew they needed help, serious help.
They needed someone who could clean a house.
Exactly. And that's when a fledgling agency, still finding its footing, gets called in the Bureau of Investigation. The folks who would later become the FBI.
Ah, the FBI. So we're talking about the big leagues now.
You got it. The feds were brought in to bring order to the chaos, to be the good guys, the white knights, in this increasingly dark and twisted tale.
I can only imagine what the Osage were thinking at this point. Probably a healthy dose of skepticism.
Oh, absolutely.
Ugh.
I mean, can you blame them? They'd been let down time and time again by those in power. Why should this new agency be any different?
Right. A new sheriff in town doesn't necessarily mean justice will be served. They had every right to be wary.
No doubt about it. But something had to change. The murders continued, and the Bureau, they were under immense pressure to deliver. And that's where Tom White enters the picture.
Tom White. Okay, who's he?
Well, picture this. A Texas Ranger, through and through.
Okay, I'm intrigued. A Texas Ranger.
Yeah, but not just any ranger. White, he was cut from a different cloth. He had this reputation, see, tough as nails, resourceful, but more importantly, he understood the law. He knew how to build a case, how to work a room, and crucially, he knew he needed the Osage on his side.
So he had that classic lawman grit, but with a side of empathy and respect for the community, he was there to help. A rare combination.
You hit the nail on the head. White saw this wasn't just about solving a few murders. It was about justice, about righting a wrong that had been allowed to fester for far too long.
It's like those old westerns, right? The Lone Ranger who rides into town and faces down a corrupt system.
Right out of central casting, almost.
So,
But White, he was the real deal. He dove headfirst into the investigation, meticulously gathering evidence, checking alibis, talking to anyone who might have a piece of the puzzle. He was determined to untangle this web of deceit, no matter how long it took.
so he's got his work cut out for him. I mean, we're talking about a conspiracy here, right? Powerful people, deeply entrenched.
You're catching on quickly. And one of the biggest breaks in the case came after an attack on a man named Bill Smith.
Bill Smith.
Now, Smith was another Osage man who had become a target. And get this, someone bombed his house.
Bombed his house.
With him and his family inside. Can you imagine?
That's brutal. What happened to Smith and his family?
It's a miracle. But Smith survived. Unfortunately, his wife and their maid weren't so lucky.
Oh, man. That's awful. So we're not just talking about isolated murders anymore, but blatant acts of terrorism.
Exactly. This is about sending a message. Don't mess with the people in power. But this act of barbarity, it backfired. You see, the investigation into the bombing led White right to a prisoner, a guy named Bert Lawson.
Okay, Bert Lawson, got it.
Now, Lawson, he was no saint, mind you, but he saw a chance to shorten his own sentence.
So he flipped,
Yeah.
decided to cooperate with the investigation.
You got it. And what he revealed shook the case to its core. Lawson, he confessed to carrying out the bombing, but here's the kicker. He claimed he was hired by Ernest Burkhart,
Wait a minute, Ernest Burkhart? Molly's husband?
the one and only.
But why? Why would he do that? His wife's family was being targeted.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It turns out Ernest was up to his neck in this whole scheme, manipulated by none other than his own uncle, William Hale.
Oh, man. Talk about a family betrayal of epic proportions.
You got that right. It's almost Shakespearean, the level of deceit, the cold-bloodedness of it all. And this revelation, it was just the tip of the iceberg. So we've got Hale, Mr. Big Shot Rancher, finally in the hot seat. How did those trials go?
Oh, you could barely move in that courtroom. Newspapers ate it up, reporters everywhere, all wanting to be the one to break the next twist in the saga. Suddenly, a small town in Oklahoma is the center of attention, and the world's watching to see if justice can prevail. But for the Osage people, this wasn't some media frenzy, right? It was their lives, their losses, their chance to finally have their voices heard.
I bet. But we're talking about William Hale, king of the Osage Hills. He didn't just roll over, did he?
You think Hale would go down without a fight? Not a chance. He lawyered up. Oh boy, did he ever. Best money could buy, naturally. Their whole game plan was two-pronged, see? Discredit anyone who dared speak against Hale and those witnesses. Let's just say they weren't angels themselves.
The old "they're all liars" defense.
Right.
Classic.
And the second part, it's almost more insidious. They painted Hale as the victim, saying he was only targeted because he was successful, a white man who'd made good.
Ugh, playing that card. Disgusting. But not surprising, right?
Yep.
Did they really think that would work? That people would buy it?
It's a tactic as old as time, unfortunately. They preyed on prejudices, tried to make the Osage seem like they couldn't handle their own affairs, needed a white man looking out for them.
But White, he saw right through it. And more importantly, the Osage people themselves, they weren't going to be silenced.
Absolutely. They found their strength, their voices, testified about the fear, the grief, the sheer betrayal of it all. Their stories, their courage, it chipped away at that carefully crafted image Hale tried so hard to build.
But it was those letters, right? The ones Hale himself wrote. Those were the nail in the coffin.
Ah, the letters. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Hale, he thought he was so smart, keeping records of his little schemes, almost bragging about it.
Ego, it'll get you every time.
Sure does. And those letters, they showed his true colors, the contempt, the sense of entitlement, how he saw the Osage as obstacles to his own greed, not human beings.
So justice was served.
The jury saw Hale for what he was. A murderer, plain and simple. Life sentence. Some of his cronies went down with him. Even Ernest Burkhart, faced with the evidence, with his own conscience, I'd like to think, he confessed to being part of it all. Got a lighter sentence, but still.
What a tangled web. But even with the convictions, it's not like this erased the pain, the loss for the Osage Nation.
No, it didn't. Scars run deep. The reign of terror, it left its mark. So-me gone, family shattered, and that feeling of being unsafe on your own land, that lingers. The trials, they were important, but the problems, the greed and racism that allowed it all to happen in the first place, those don't disappear overnight.
It's a heavy story, but an important one. The Osage people, they showed incredible resilience. Faced with pure evil, they fought back, demanded justice, and made sure their story was heard. It reminds us why we have to learn about these dark chapters so they don't repeat themselves.
Exactly. And while Killers of the Flower Moon focuses on this specific time, this one place, the themes it deals with, exploitation, greed, the fight for basic human dignity, those are universal. It's a reminder that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? So we can't just turn away when we hear these stories, no matter how uncomfortable. We listen, we learn, and we work to build a world where this kind of darkness doesn't have a place to take root.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
There you have it, folks. The Osage Reign of Terror, a story about greed, about power, about the human cost of unchecked ambition. But more than that, it's a story about the power of resilience, of truth, and ultimately of justice, however long it takes to arrive.